Hello, my name is Kairos. I am a chronomancer, a being who can manipulate time. For eons, I have dwelled within the Gateway Arch, feeding on the temporal energies of the humans who visit this landmark, twisting and distorting their perceptions of past, present, and future. Most are unaware of my presence, but occasionally, an unlucky soul catches a glimpse behind the curtain. Sarah had always wanted to visit the Gateway Arch. As an architecture student, she was fascinated by its sleek, modernist design, a gleaming silver curve rising 630 feet above the Mississippi River. When her college announced a weekend field trip to St. Louis, she jumped at the chance to finally see it in person. The day was clear and mild as Sarah's group approached the visitor center at the base of the arch. They passed through security and boarded the tram that would take them to the observation deck at the top. Sarah could hardly contain her excitement as the pod doors closed and they began the 4-minute ascent. But as the tram rose higher, Sarah noticed something strange. The other students in her pod had gone completely still and silent, as if frozen in time. She turned to her friend Jenna to ask if she noticed anything weird, but Jenna too was motionless, her face blank and expressionless. Unnerved, Sarah looked out the small tram window. The interior of the arch seemed to be pulsing and undulating around her, its metal walls rippling like liquid silver. Suddenly, Sarah felt a searing pain in her temples. She cried out and squeezed her eyes shut against the building pressure in her skull. When she opened them again, she was no longer in the tram. She was standing on the observation deck, the floor-to-ceiling windows looking out over the city. But something was very wrong. The sky outside was a livid scarlet, casting an eerie blood-colored light over the landscape. The buildings of the city were in ruins, crumbling and decayed as if centuries had passed. And in the distance, where the river should have been, a vast chasm yawned, a gaping wound in the earth ringed by jagged obsidian teeth. Sarah spun away from the terrifying view, her heart pounding. And then she saw the creature. It stood in the center of the observation deck, towering and cadaverous, its form flickering between skeletal and smoke. Crimson robes hung in tattered folds around its frame, and its eyes blazed like hellish coals in its gaunt, skull-like face. "Who are you?" Sarah stammered, her voice shaking. "What's happening?" The being stretched its lipless mouth in a corpse's grin. "I am Kairos," it said, its voice a sepulchral rasp. "I am the watcher in the arch, the keeper of stolen time. You have trespassed in my domain, and now your years are forfeit." No, this can't be real," Sarah said, staggering backwards. "I'm hallucinating or dreaming. Wake up, Sarah, wake up." "Your pleas are in vain," Kairos intoned. "The moment you entered my sanctum, you stepped outside the flow of time. There can be no escape. Your past, your present, your future, all belong to me now." The creature advanced, reaching one emaciated hand towards her face. Sarah tried to run, but she was rooted in place, her muscles locked with terror. Kairos' fingers brushed her forehead, and she screamed as a white-hot agony ripped through her mind. Images of her life began to flicker rapid fire before her eyes, like a skipping film reel. She saw herself as a child playing in her front yard, as a teenager getting ready for prom, at her college graduation. But the scenes began to warp and change, becoming darker, more twisted. In one, her childhood home was consumed by flames while shadowy figures cavorted in the fire. Another showed her striding across a stage in cap and gown, but the faces of the crowd were rotting, skeletal. "Stop, please," Sarah begged, tears streaming down her face. But the visions continued, each one more grotesque than the last. Now she saw herself as an old woman, languishing in a filthy room, while chittering creatures skittered in the darkness. Her body was wasted, racked with age and disease, but she couldn't die, couldn't escape. Kairos loomed before her, drinking in her anguish, growing stronger. "Your timeline is polluted now," he gloated. "The past a charnel house, the present a nightmare, the future an endless hell. And with each moment of your suffering, I add your stolen chronons to my hoard." Through the haze of pain and horror, A last defiant spark ignited in Sarah's mind. She focused all her will on the hideous visions, trying to assert control. "No," she gritted out. "This is my life, my time. You can't have it." She concentrated fiercely, and the scene before her eyes shuddered and flickered. For an instant, she glimpsed the observation deck as it truly was, sunlit and crowded with happy tourists. Then Kairos snarled, and the illusion snapped back into place. But it was too late. Sarah wrenched free of the chronomancer's grasp and staggered away, her head reeling. "Foolish mortal," Kairos thundered. "You only delay the inevitable. There is no future for you now, but the one I have wrought." The creature lunged for her again, its claws outstretched. Sarah looked wildly around, desperate for escape. Her eyes fell on the emergency exit door across the deck. A faint green exit sign glowed above it, the only point of normalcy in the nightmarish scene. She sprinted for it, slamming into the door with all her strength. To her amazement, it burst open. She felt a tremendous wrenching sensation, as if she was being pulled in 100 directions at once. There was a blinding flash, a deafening roar. And then, she was tumbling out onto the observation deck, the real one, sprawling face first on the sun-warmed floor. Stunned, Sarah pushed herself up on her elbows. The sky was blue, the city whole and gleaming. Her classmates milled around her, chatting and laughing, oblivious to her disheveled state. She looked behind her and saw the emergency exit door, closed and unmarked, no hint of the horror that lurked beyond. "You okay, Sarah?" Jenna asked, noticing her on the floor and helping her up. "You look really pale. Did you faint or something?" I don't know," Sarah stammered. "Something happened, something awful. Didn't you see it?" Jenna frowned. "See what? We just got here. You sure you're feeling all right?" Sarah shook her head, not knowing what to think. Had it all been a vivid hallucination, a paranoid fantasy brought on by her fear of heights? Or had she actually contended with a malevolent supernatural entity barely escaping its clutches? She didn't say anything further to Jenna, just made an excuse of feeling lightheaded from the ride up. She stayed close to the center of the deck after that, far from the unnerving emergency exit, and left the arch as soon as she was able, not even pausing to take in the view she had been so excited to see. But in the weeks and months that followed, Sarah couldn't shake the residual dread of her experience at the monument. She was plagued by disturbing dreams, visions of crumbling cities and skies the color of blood. And always, Kairos was there, grinning his ghastly grin, crooning that her time would come, that there was no escape. She avoided photos and mementos of the arch, even dropping her architecture courses, unable to stomach the sight of the structure that had nearly entrapped her. She told herself firmly that it had all been in her head, a bizarre stress reaction, nothing more. But a small, insistent part of her knew the truth, that she had brushed against something ancient and evil that day, a hungry god nested in steel and stone, that only the smallest twist of fate had kept her from joining the ranks of the lost and vanished. And sometimes, in the dark, Sarah would swear she smelled the dry bone scent of the chronomancer, heard the rasp of its voice in her ear. Only a reprieve, it seemed to whisper, never a release. In the end, all chronons returned to Kairos. So she keeps running, keeps looking over her shoulder, keeps praying that she left the timeless horror behind her in that awful red-stained world. But in the lonely midnight hours, Sarah wonders if it's only a matter of time before the archdemon's reach ensnares her, before she's dragged back to its domain of distorted chronology and twisted perception. Before her stolen years are added to its ageless hoard, and she's trapped forever as a ghost in Kairos's temporal prison.